So I wanted to introduce Johnathan Wright, and he reached out, and I was so delighted to hear from him that he would be available to speak about the Indian Incentive Program. So he's currently the Associate Director for the Office of Small Business Programs at DOD, and the focus of his position now is collaboration, right, across agencies, DOD small business offices, sharing best practices, and he also serves as the program manager for the Indian Incentive Program, which, as you know, is all about encouraging the use of AIA NNH businesses. In addition to all of that experience, Johnathan also has experience in finance and has worked in Wall Street. So he knows all kinds of things, ins and outs, and is a great resource for you as well. He's an alumnus of Hampton University, so local guy, right? And he graduated magna cum laude and has a BS in finance. He also holds an executive MBA from the University of Maryland at the Smith School of Business, where he also graduated at the top of his class. So we're so happy that you're here and willing to share your expertise. And I'll turn it over to you. You have to press pretty hard.
Okay, awesome. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Took 3 hours and 44 minutes to get here from Loudoun County, but it's good to be here. I wonder how long it's going to take to get home. I saw all the construction across going to the tunnel, and that was not here before when I was here. It's been a while, so I'm coming up on my 20th year anniversary at Hampton, so I'm looking forward to coming back for homecoming. So I'm getting old, dating myself, I guess. But pleasure to be here again. So bringing you greetings from Mr. Farouk Mita. So if you don't know who he is, he's the Director of Small Business for OSD, for all the DOD. And so pretty much my role, I have two hats that I wear. So one hat is the Indian Incentive Program. The other is I set all the goals for DOD and all the components. So working with SBA, so performance management, making sure we hit our goals, things of that nature. So I know the last gentleman talked a lot about that 15% that we have to hit, and the Secretary of Defense is well versed on that, wanting weekly updates in terms of where we are and what we're doing. And so there is a lot of discussion about hitting our goals. So from a small business perspective, you are in a perfect spot, because this is an opportunity where small business has been highlighted. And typically in my previous role, we didn't talk a lot about small business, to be frank. And now that's the topic that most people are talking about across the department. So great time, interesting times, great time for you as small business owners. But what we're going to talk about today is a little bit about the Indian Incentive Program. Has anybody used the program before? Has anybody heard of the program?
I thought it was a myth.
You thought it was a myth? So we're going to talk about that.
Not from the government. I used to work for the government. So I thought it was a myth.
A lot has changed. So I've been in the role for 2 years. And when I first started in the role, I think that was the consensus that I've heard from people that's used the program, is that there's been some challenges getting things through the system, things of that nature. So we'll talk about a lot of the improvements that we've made, and we do have the funding. So that was a myth that a lot of people said we don't have funding. We do have funding, fully funded. It's congressionally mandated now, so it's in the budget. And we don't have any backlog as well. So we're looking for rebates to come through the system. So show of hands again, who's used it? I think nobody in this room has used the program at all. Wow. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why we're here. It's because we need more participants using it. We see the usual suspects, and you'll see that as we look through the stats. So just a little bit about the office, so you can kind of take a look here how we're structured. So we're a part of OSD, but the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Industrial Policy. So we just became an ASD, which is a big deal. So our new leadership, Honorable Laura Taylor Calais, just joined us, political appointee, and she's a fantastic leader, very well versed in what we're doing here from a small business perspective. And you'll see over here on the side, you have Director's Office of Small Business Programs. So we're kind of on our own island within the organization. We're not as deep as you would say, but in terms of the focus area, Mr. Mita is direct to the ASD, but also the Secretary of Defense, Undersecretary of Defense. We have meetings with them literally bi-weekly on this topic. So in terms of our role, just to give you a sense, so we support all the syscoms, the system commands, all the components, so you can kind of get a sense for, we kind of roll up. So all the offices have a small business office, all the components, and those directors then, they don't report to us per se, but we support their offices from the perspective of policy. We have the mentor protege program, so I know that was mentioned in the last discussion, so that's under our office. And we also support the 8A program as well with SBA, working very closely with them. And also the Apex Accelerators. So everybody knows who their Apex Accelerator is, right, in the room. Very important person that you need to know. And that's run through our office as well. Now, the Indian Incentive Program. So if you look here at the chart and you look at the funding levels. So again, congressionally mandated now, so we have a budget line established in 1997, so not too old, right? And we started with $8 million. And then that grew in 98 to 15 million. It's been steady state for the last decade or so. And then recently, 2019, right before COVID, we started to see an influx of rebates coming in and more lobbyists, quite frankly, going to the Hill asking for more funding for the program. And so now we've increased it to 20 million in 2020 or 2019 started to increase, and then 2021, we had 25 million. And they've been asking for more funding as well on the Hill. However, if we don't see more rebates coming in, then that's going to impact the demand. So the more demand that we have, then the more opportunity for more funding. So what is the Indian Incentive Program and how do you qualify? So number one, the whole purpose of this program is for prime contractors to be incentivized to use Native American, ASEANs, also Native Hawaiian companies to use them as a subcontractor. Now, you have to have at least $500,000 on that subcontract to be eligible. So it's not the smaller subcontracts, it has to be at least $500K. If it meets that requirement, then that's one of the value propositions that you can present to the prime to utilize you as a subcontractor, because they're going to get 5% back in a rebate, which is essentially free money. So that money goes to the prime. So a lot of misconception is that that money will go to the sub, but it doesn't. That just gives you an opportunity to become a subcontractor for one of those prime contractors. Any questions on that? Yes.
So when you say prime, we immediately think of a large.
Yes.
Can the prime be a small as well?
Yes. Okay. Yes. Now, I did hear a talk about affiliations, and I was thinking in my mind if I were in your shoes and we have all these different affiliations, but that does not apply with the Indian Incentive Program. So it's no affiliations from that perspective. So it can't be, you know, ANC, for example, and then you have sister companies and things of that nature, and then you're getting the 5%. No, it doesn't work that way for the Indian Incentive Program specifically.
I have a question.
Sure.
Does the rebate need to be advertised in the solicitation?
Yes.
Okay.
Very good point. That's going to be the next slide.
Okay, sorry.
So no, that's a great point, because the language has to be in there. The FAR clause has to be in there, and I'll bring that up so you can see. But the contracting officers, we've been training them, but there are a lot of new contracting officers, quite frankly, so it's a revolving door. So we have to constantly make sure that they're informed about that clause has to be in the contract. Otherwise, I've seen instances where after the fact you can go back in and add it, but it's a lot more challenging, and also time consuming. So that can delay your rebate if it's not in there. Yes, Chris.
But if you as a prime doing your planning know you're going to be doing $500,000 or more with a Native American, you can request that before pre-award to add that?
You can. You can. So a lot of times we'll see the subcontractors and the primes working very closely with, the contracting officers to make sure that it's in the clause, they verify that, they validate that. I've even seen the subs really working closely with the primes because a lot of times they don't know how to complete the paperwork properly. So I've seen that they're working very closely with them to make sure that all the paperwork is in right the first time, because that can cause significant delays in the process. And just when I came on board, I seen a few rebates that, were well, it took years really because the paperwork wasn't accurate and things of that nature. So we've gotten it down to more truncated to more of a 6-month process, and hopefully we can get that to a 3-month. But fingers crossed. Of course, this is the government you're talking about, so there's a lot of bureaucracy, but we'll talk about how we're using technology to streamline the process. Any other questions on that? So we talked about the clause. So this is very, very, very important that they have this in here. The DFARS clause 252.226/7001. If you haven't read that language, I highly encourage you to just Google it, go online, go on our website, business.defense.gov. There is a lot of information on what needs to go into the contract. But definitely read that because it will tell you exactly what qualifies you to participate in the program. So this is all governed under Section 504 of the Indian Financing Act of 1974. So there's not a huge clause when I read it. There's only like 2 paragraphs that touch on this really when it talks about the Indian Incentive Program. But it is a very simple program to understand from that standpoint. They articulate it very clearly in terms of who qualifies and who doesn't qualify. So you got to be federally recognized tribal enrollment, Native American, Native Alaskan, Native Hawaiian, right? And BIA is a part of that. So we will validate and verify. So it has to be 51% ownership as well in terms of making sure that you have more than 51% of the enterprise ownership. So you want to make sure you meet those qualifications. So in terms of how you submit a rebate, I'm not going to go too much in depth on that in this discussion. This is more of a higher level perspective of how the program works. But if you have questions, you can reach out to our office and we'll walk you through all the particulars, because it is very important that you have all the documentation submitted correctly the first time, or else one, the contracting officer is going to sit on it for maybe weeks or months, and then once it comes to us, then we're going to kick it back, and then it's going to just sit in a black hole. So you want to make sure that you have all the documents correct, and I've seen this happen. But we have a very stringent process in terms of how we review the rebates. And so what we're using now is technology to be able to make sure that we streamline the process. So we created a portal. And so this portal will make sure that all the documentation is in accurately, but also notify the prime contractor of where it is in the process. I think that's been the biggest challenge, is people were submitting rebates and had no clue where it was in the process. So now when you submit it, you're going to get alerts along the way, which is very important, and I think have been applauded. So when we talk to the prime contractors, Lockheed's, the Northrop Grumman's, the larger companies, they are very excited about that new development. But they're the same usual suspects that are using the program. So we want to have more diversity in the program, have more people using the program, but it comes to awareness. And that's one of the challenges that we've been seeing, especially when you look at the stats from a Native Hawaiian perspective. Less than 1% of Native Hawaiians have used the program. So if we look at the rebates by the numbers, so if you take a look at the rebates since 2015 through 2022, we've had roughly about that 120 range. FY22, we had 133 rebates, 25 million, of course, in funding, and leveraging $500 million of contracts. So we're pretty happy with the number of totality, but the diversity of who's using it is the challenge that we have. So if you look at it from a perspective of industries participating in the Indian Incentive Program, you'll see that manufacturing and professional services are, about 50% of who's using it. And so that's okay, but we would like to see some other diversity in this regard. And I'm not sure why it's showing up in this fashion, but I'll send out the slides and make sure that you can actually read it. And then also FY 18 to 22, you can kind of get a feel for what syscoms are actually using the program. And it's Air Force and Army overwhelmingly using the program the most. Participation. So this was the breakdown where I talked about, who is using it from a native subcontractor perspective. So if you look at Alaskan, that's 56%. They're using the program very well. Native Hawaiian, 1%. Native Indian, 42%. So these are just stats. It's not necessarily good or bad, but just the facts. And so we'll send this out as well so you guys have these slides. This was interesting when we ran the numbers, and we're going to update this as well with FY23 numbers. But the DOD primes, the top 5 DOD primes that are using the program, Lockheed Martin, Anham, Simstar, US Foods, BAE Systems. So those are the main ones using the program from a prime perspective. And then you can see from a native subcontractor perspective who the top 5 are using it. It's a lot of services organizations are using it. A lot of food actually services as well. We're starting to see a lot of those coming through. Now in terms of location of participating primes, you'll see that there's some states that have no participation at all. Obviously our goal is to have the whole United States using it. Every state has some representation, but in this case there are some that are not. And I was actually just up at a conference in North Dakota, and we're making a big push to go to some of those states that have no representation to at least make them aware that these opportunities exist. From a native subcontractor perspective, you'll see just some facts here that there's certain states that are not participating. So if you see your state up here, most of you are from Virginia or North Carolina, so you do have representation, but there are other states here that we want to see more representation as well. Improving the rebate process. So that's been one of the biggest issues that we've heard when we went out to hear why people weren't using the program. 1, it was because of lack of awareness, or 2, because the program wasn't funded, or 3, they thought that people the government wasn't processing them fast enough to be an incentive to use it. So we created an Indian Incentive Program portal. We have the funding for it. We have the technical requirements done, and we're ready to start building out on it. So unfortunately, I'm going to be going back to another group in a few months here. So, but I've left the requirements, hopefully in good hands, so we'll be moving forward with the development of that. But yes, question.
Do you need a sole source contract Native American company to fill that requirement?
You know what? I'm not on the contracting side, so we could talk about that. Let me get your card, right? And I'll give it to the Corps. Indian Incentive Program portal. So these are just some views. I'm not going to bore you with it, but the intent is to streamline the process within the government, better awareness across where it is in the process, making sure our contracting officers understand how the process works, and more so communication with the contracting community, but also the subcontractors and the primes. I'll pause there. Manny, down at the bottom, I wish he was here with me, but he is the one that does all of the work in the background. He will still be on board. He's been doing this for 6 years. He is fantastic. So any questions that you have about the program, any of the particulars, you can reach out to Manny or myself. Also, business.defense.gov, great resource for you. Highly, highly encourage you go there. There's our QR code there. I have some cards here as well. I'll be sticking around for maybe 10 or 15 minutes after this talk. And happy to be here. Any questions? Yes.
I have a question. You mentioned the program is looking for diversity
Yes.
in utilization. Is there anything that prevents a Native American-owned prime from using the program?
No.
Thank you.
Yes. We would like that. No other? Oh, yes, sir.
On a few slides back, you have it broken down by the states of like the next slide. That slide there. Is that by the specific tribes to those?
So these are where when they submitted the documentation, they had to put where the work was being performed. And so a lot of the times, these are not necessarily where they were headquartered, but where the work or the contract was being performed. And so that's what you're seeing here in terms of the state. Yes. No other questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
If you had to say, what is the number one thing that is most misunderstood or not known that's important?
So what's misunderstood? I think the funding levels, there's a lot of questions about, is the funding level going to continue? Is it going to be going away? Is it going to be increasing? We get a lot of lobbyists to come in and say, hey, there's more demand, we need more funding. However, when we look at the number of rebates coming in, we always have enough funding. Also, it's not one-year money. So a lot of times that's the other thing. You see $25 million, does it have to be expended in that year? It's actually 3-year money for the Indian Incentive Program. So we could have money that crosses over in multiple years. So that's also a benefit. But the money typically comes in every year, so we'll have a rolling $25 million, and sometimes that can be more if it hasn't been expended in the previous year.
Thank you.
All right, no problem.
All set?
All right. Oh,
And, where was the question?
If there's time.
Sure, go right ahead.
I was just gonna give you offline, but, so a lot of the times we have to sell these contracts or these incentive programs, and you gave some good, information earlier, but a lot of the times gov to gov likes to talk gov to gov. So we're just blood-sucking contractors, you know, we're there to sell, right? But is there anybody that we can like set them up with you guys so they can get a brief directly?
Oh, yeah.
So they just reach out to your office?
Yes. So I don't know if you heard of the Triad meeting. So it's a big meeting that the primes hold. And the last one we did was maybe a month ago. Diane Dempsey from BAE held it. And there was probably 500 participants on that call. It was from all of the prime contractors. And we did a brief similar to this on the program, and they were blown away. It was a lot of contracting officers, things of that nature, and they didn't know it existed. So I think that awareness is going to help the subcontractors quite a bit. Yes.
Quick one, have any primes run into timing issues where they submit and the funds tapped?
Yes, previous to me coming on board, I've seen that happen. Where the funding wasn't there, we had some issues like continuing resolutions and things of that nature, where that's challenged us with paying out rebates in timely fashion. And so that's been a challenge. But now that we've have it in the budget, we have the funding there, we're processing in time, I don't think that's going to be as much of a challenge going forward.
But it's still finite, correct? It's a cap. Is it a hard cap on the $25 million so that once it's done for that fiscal year,
You got to wait for the
you're
new
not gonna
money.
get a rebate?
Yes, first come, first serve. So, yeah, precisely, yes. Yes.
Does it automatically roll over to the next year, or
If it's
if you don't make the cap this year, is it automatically roll over to next year?
correct. So it'll just be a first come, first serve. So if you didn't get paid out this year, you will eventually get paid out. That's the bottom line. So that's the beautiful thing about it. It's just a matter of when.
So if you get tapped in a year, you're not out.
Correct.
Rebate, you're just gonna have to wait on it. Checking them in.
Exactly. But now the other challenge with that is if the contract's closed, so then the contracting officer has to reopen the contract, and sometimes there's some challenges with that. So we've had funding that got kicked back because the contract was already closed. So we're trying to prevent that by processing in real time so that we won't have that issue. But that could be an issue. All right, thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to